What's something you can swear you saw but no one is believing you? Not something I saw, something I felt and heard. I was struggling to sleep one night, lying in bed feeling wired and irritable when I felt pressure lift from the bed on my partner's side. I assumed he'd got up to go to the bathroom. I was facing the opposite way, so I didn't see him do this. A few minutes go by, and I hear him come back into the room, and feel him get back in bed. Nothing strange about that. Lying there still frustrated, the same thing happens again. A lift of pressure. Some rustling sounds like a person trying to navigate a dark room. An absence of sound for a few moments, and then the sensation of weight on the bed again. Still not thinking much of it, because it wasn't an obvious cause for concern. I continue trying to fall asleep, then it happens again, and again, and again. I wasn't too into the idea of asking him if he was okay, as we had a ridiculous argument that night, and I was pretty pissed off with him, so I just ignored it. But then it sounded like he had got up and was simply pacing around the room clumsily. I could hear things on the shelves being touched and slightly moved, and hands gently brushing against walls. And then I felt the bed suddenly dip in a concentrated spot of the mattress, as though he had stood on it. This carries on for I don't know how long. Rustling, pressure on the bed, and so on until I snap. I sit bolt upright, turn around and say, "What the hell are you doing?" To see my partner waking up from a very deep sleep and looking confused. I told him what had happened, and he said he'd been asleep next to me the whole time, which was pretty obvious to see him in his very sleepy state. Plus he would have had mere seconds to jump into bed without me noticing in the time it took me to sit up and turn around. I somehow fell asleep that night feeling confused and as though eyes were on me, and in a typical cheesy haunted house fashion, I get a call from my mum the next morning telling me my uncle had died the night before. My betta fish disappeared out of a covered tank and then reappeared in front of my eyes. If you can imagine, this tank is clear plastic on all sides, including the bottom. There's nowhere to hide when it's empty. The only thing not transparent is the metal lid. Betta fish are known to hide, so I didn't worry about not seeing him for a couple days. But on day 3 I got worried. So I took the heater and filter out, checked the inside of the filter, took the plants out, took the hides out. No fish, nothing in the tank, but water and glass rocks now. So I started scooping the rocks out, thinking he may have gotten trapped under there and died. Pretty soon I'm staring at a tank with nothing but water in it. No fish. I figure there's no way he's still alive. So I start scooping the water out. It's about 3/4 full when suddenly my fish does one of those fishy slow turns in the dead center of the tank. There he was. It wasn't like I turned away and then back and my fish was there. No, I was staring at the tank and I quite literally saw him swim back into existence. 1 second he wasn't there, the next he was. I moved him to a smaller bowl for a few days to keep an eye on him. Covered the top with perforated plastic wrap to ensure no jumping. He disappeared from the bowl a couple days later and never came back. Have owned several betta fish, and I can honestly say no other fish has ever dimension hopped out of a tank since. Was playing with my cousin and a friend of ours outside. We were riding our bikes and had a bunch of fun, but couldn't explore that far from where I live since we were like 7 or 8 Y/O. As we were cheerfully cycling down a long road behind a parking garage near my apartment, I started to slow down as I was getting tired of it. Both of them were continuing to cycle down the road as they hadn't noticed me being left behind yet. You have to understand that the location of the road was right in between the parking garage, with 2 floors, and a fence which has only rails on the other side, and was usually deserted. So once I stopped cycling, I could only turn tail or follow the road ahead. After reaching my limit, I simply stopped my bike midway after a while and tried to catch some breath. While doing so, something caught my eye on the back stairs of the parking garage. I tried to get closer to check out what it was out of curiosity, but boy was that a mistake. I spotted a man who seemed kneel down behind a wall of the back stairs. Didn't seem suspicious at first. However, after a closer look I saw what seemed like knife covered in blood. My body froze and all I could feel was fear that went through my body, which felt like it lasted for minutes. The man just started to catch on with me standing on road and began to slowly stand up and face my direction. I was somehow able to get my brain back to process and bolted down the street with any power I had left in me. After passing both my cousin and friend, as well as leaving a big distance to where I spotted him, I started to break down in tears and explaining what happened. No one would believe me since they went back to check and found nothing strange. Got so traumatized from it that I avoided the road until my mid-teens. My dad passed away from cancer when I was 7 years old. My parents asked me if I wanted to be there when he died, and I said no. My parents arranged for me to go to their best friend's house to sleep over the night. After I had said my goodbyes as he was fading away, that night he did pass, and I experienced something that I cannot explain. I remember this vividly. I was fast asleep, and I wake up bolted upright at 11:50 p.m., like I was pulled awake, and I knew immediately that he had died right then. I had this really strange sense of calm and acceptance, and I felt my dad's presence, like he was saying goodbye. Later I asked my mom when he died and told her that story, and it shook her hard. It happened. A few years later she took me to a clairvoyant, who afterwards said I was a clairvoyant too. My mother is a highly intelligent lady, women of science, and to my knowledge, didn't tell this lady a thing. A few years later I'm sitting on the couch after school with my sister watching TV, and I get that same feeling again and immediately know that my mom has been involved in a car accident, and I told my sister right away, like I didn't have a choice, I just said it. I was right, she had been in a car accident at that exact time. This was before cell phones, and I had no way of knowing. No communication with my mom. Two events where I knew without a doubt that events had occurred when I had no logical way of knowing. It hasn't happened since, and I have no explanation whatsoever for either of them. My cousin saw this as well, but anyway, back in Pakistan my family owns a good amount of land, and my uncle was building kinda far from most of the houses in our village. It wasn't that far, but further than most houses were. The part of land he built his house on wasn't completely cleared out, and he had a path going through the trees. He needed the path initially for vehicles to get in to bring building materials. Anyway, I was walking past at night with my cousin, and it was like 11 at night, so not that late, but it was pitch black BC. It was December. In our village there had been a few people who claimed to have seen jinns in the area, and while walking back I jokingly said, "Let's go say hi," even though I knew they were asleep. I looked down the path and saw someone there. I pointed it out to my cousin, who shouted, "Who's there?" It disappeared. Then about 10 seconds later it reappeared significantly closer. I was so scared I nearly pissed myself. I was 7 at the time. We broke into a sprint and ran home. I couldn't sleep properly that night. I grew up 3 blocks from the Delaware River, Jersey side, a little north of Philly. Shortly after 9/11 I saw what looked basically like a black bullet, only gigantic, like submarine sized, go into the river from above going north, like a plane landing on water but going under. I don't believe it had wings. I had been out for a walk and ran home to tell my parents. I was worried because 9/11 had just happened, and my 5th grade brain thought this could be related. My parents had me draw out what I saw, step by step. Eventually they said I was probably mistaken. I went to school the next day and told my teacher, and she said, "How weird, Joe." I said he saw the same thing. "Joe, I live 2 blocks from the river. Either we are both mistaken, or we watch some weird torpedo vessel go into the Delaware." I was home along one evening and had gone to sleep for the night. I live with my so and 2 indoor cats, but she was out of state traveling for business. I woke up in the middle of the night, wasn't sure of time, but it was completely dark. Because my body was freezing cold, I actually like it cool when I sleep, and usually have the temperature around 70 degrees or colder, since I live in central Texas. But this was different. I was ice cold, but wrapped in blankets. It was middle of summer, so evenings aren't cold. When I grabbed my phone to look at the time, it seemed to be off, and I pressed the on button, but it didn't turn it on. Since I was half asleep, I shrugged this off. I walked out of my bedroom to go adjust the thermostat and noticed that the cats weren't around. This was weird because these fur balls are always hanging out in the bed or around the bed. Anyhow, I walked to the thermostat and tried to adjust it, but the power to the thermostat, I have a Nest, was nil and the power to the house seemed to be off. I peeked out of the upstairs window to see if any of my neighbors were having power issues and noticed that all of their outdoor lights were working just fine. From the time I woke to this moment was probably 1 to 2 minutes maximum. I decide to wander downstairs to grab some water, but am startled when I realize there is a glove light coming from the first floor. The way my house is situated, I couldn't see the light until I had approached the stairs. I found this odd because the power seemed to be out just upstairs, which didn't make a lot of sense. I started walking down the stairs and began to hear a faint humming noise. The noise had a high pitch to it with arbitrary pulses of low sounds, almost like a muffled weed whacker that someone is throttling at random. As I continue to walk down the stairs, I spot a dark, slowly moving figure in the room with light at the bottom of the stairs. The next step that I take feels like I walked off the side of a cliff or was sucked into the floor. That is really the best way I can explain it, because I don't remember what happened after that moment. I just lost all feeling from my body. My next memory is waking up again to the sound of my phone's alarm. Everything seemed back to normal. I sat there in bed, cat back to being lazy in bed next to me, and tried to think about the 2-minute incident that happened in the middle of the night. I'm not a sleepwalker, and I was definitely not dreaming. My security system's app shows the time whenever a door is opened or closed. I realized that my security system was disarmed on the app, and that the front door had been opened and closed several times throughout the night. I pulled up my security footage from the exterior cameras, and was surprised to learn that there was zero footage from the night. Like the motion sensors reacted to a random car driving by around 10 PM, and then the next thing is another random car in the morning. So someone/something walked in and out of my front door, but the cameras did not capture any footage. My neighbor across the street has a good security system that points at my house, so I asked if he can review the footage from his cameras. I told him some made up story about how I thought someone had broken into my truck. Anyway, he said it was weird because when he pulled up the footage from that night, his cameras did not record anything, just a time gap once again. My first thought was that I was sleepwalking and that the memory was a dream, but it just couldn't have been. When I looked out of the window in the middle of the night, I distinctly recall a red pickup truck parked the wrong direction in front of the neighbor's house. I always notice when cars are parked left wheel to curb, because I've gotten the ticket for this in the past. Anyhow, the truck was not there before I went to sleep, based on footage, but was there in the morning, based on footage. So the truck was there when I saw it in the middle of the night. I definitely woke up in the middle of the night, cold as ice, no cats, no working phone or thermostat, saw the truck out of the window, and then got warped by something on the stairs. A couple additional things were different in the house. The security system was disarmed, and I definitely armed it before going to bed. The light was still on downstairs and that was absolutely off. Before I went to bed, my whole body smelled like burnt marshmallows. I know this is weird, but it's really how it smelled. And lastly, my 55-gallon fish tank that sits at the bottom of the stairs in the entryway was missing 2/3 of the water. Seriously, where the F did 40+ gallons of water go? The whole area around the tank was bone dry and the fish were fine. I think I was mind-effed by some thirsty aliens.